Season 4, Episode 12 here on CBB Review Courtside, previewing another bubble team today, Texas A&M, the Aggies. Haven't locked up a spot in the tournament just yet. A little bit surprising to me and Donna Conrad, who's joining us here today, KRHD sports reporter. Donna, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Obviously, we talked about it a little bit before we started this, and we'll jump into it right now. Texas A&M, obviously a team that comes into the season with some pretty high expectations at this point in the year. I mean, what's that level at as far as the level that people think that Texas A&M will advance into March Madness?
Well, I mean, part of it is the fan base after last season. There were high expectations. They have so many players that came back. I think only one transferred out. So I think the expectation was we're just going to keep building off of last season. They were a super gritty team last year, grinded out a lot of big time wins. And obviously it's a little surprising where they're at now and where they've ended up with losing the last 5 in SEC play. So just all in all, I think it's fairly surprising that they haven't been able to quite figure it out.
Yeah, one of the most interesting resumes in the country for Texas A&M. You've got a handful of Quad 1 wins, also a ton of Quad 3 losses. Is this just one of the craziest teams to cover? I don't know how long you've been covering the Aggies, but what's it just been like for a team that just seems like any given day they can play, great or just play awful?
Well, it's really surprising considering last season they did not lose an SEC game at home. And so we covered some big time wins, the one against Alabama at the end of the season. It just felt like they couldn't lose at home. Even if they were down, they figured a way to come back. And you touched on it with the Quad 1 wins. Their schedule and their resume is so interesting because I know last season, a big talking point, at least around the committee and where they were selected last year, was that they didn't play a strong non-conference schedule. So this year, they beefed that up big time. They play big teams, Iowa State, FAU, Ohio State, Memphis, you name it, and Houston actually too. And they had some really quality wins, and it felt like, they had some losses ahead of SEC play, but then going into SEC play, the teams that you would expect them to beat, like the Vanderbilts, the Arkansas, LSUs, those were really surprising. And it just seems like some games they just haven't shown up for a full 40 minutes.
What do you think the reason is for kind of like this decline? And it's funny because, as I mentioned before, we just talked to a Wisconsin guy, and it's sort of the same story. 2 teams that bring in pretty much the same roster from last year's team. Expectations are high. Are there guys that maybe aren't living up to these expectations this year? What's your sense of it?
I just think part of it is they haven't been able to get the offense going the way that they have in past seasons, especially last year. It felt like even if they couldn't get it going in the first half, they were just able to turn it on. Wade Taylor IV is an incredible player, as is Tyrese Radford. And one of the interesting things is if Tyrese scores over 20 points, the Aggies record is somewhere, I want to say they're 13-1 when he scores over 20 points. The issue has become there hasn't been consistent scoring. Their field goal percentage the last 5 games has not been good. And then just as recently as their game against South Carolina on Wednesday night, they didn't make a 3 in the first half. And so part of it is just they haven't been able to shoot their way out of it yet, so to speak, because they are leading the SEC in offensive rebounding. They have Anderson Garcia down low, who leads the country in rebounds per game. And yet for some reason they're not knocking down those second chance opportunities, and it just becomes an issue. I mean, straight up, when you can't put the ball in the basket, sometimes it's as simple as that.
Yeah, obviously a team that's averaging 7 to 3 points per game, not terrible there, but well below 30% from the 3-point line, not winning basketball, but at the same time winning players. Tyrese Radford, Wade Taylor IV, guys that you want to see. If you watch college basketball, guys that you want to see play in March. You also got Buzz Williams as the head coach, a guy that certainly has a lot of experience with this. Do you think that that's maybe where this rests, as 3 games left in the SEC regular season, SEC tournament coming up? Buzz Williams is a guy who can certainly bring them over the top. Do you think that's where the confidence is right now?
I think it has to be, and I think they have a veteran presence in the locker room. Not only do you have Wade and Boots, but you have Henry Coleman, who has a lot of experience. I mean, you look around that locker room, and there is such a veteran presence. This is also the same team that quite a few of them went through an 8-game losing streak in February 2 years ago. So they've been there before in a sense. I think the expectations obviously this year are a lot greater, but I do think that a lot of it falls on, hey, they rely on Buzz and they trust Buzz Williams as a head coach. And honestly, all the players can't say enough things about how great of a leader and coach he is. So I do think that this final stretch and the SEC tournament is really going to be kind of their defining moment as to whether or not they're able to, sneak into the tournament, so to speak.
Yeah, and the final stretch, pretty interesting. 3 games below 500, 3 winnable games, and 2 of them against fellow SEC bubble teams, Mississippi State at home, and then an away game at an Ole Miss team that, for me personally, don't really understand how they're getting this much love. They have very few good wins. But with those 3 games coming up, I know it's a team that's already beat Tennessee and Kentucky, but is that kind of like the perfect schedule, you think? I mean, they've racked up the quad one wins. Now, they could take care of business, knock off some bubble teams here, or would you rather see them have another Tennessee, Kentucky, or Auburn in this final 3 games?
Well, I think it's interesting because this season, to me, it's felt like they've kind of played wherever their competition is at quite a bit. I mean, they've shown up for the big games. Kentucky at home, Tennessee at home. We watched it against South Carolina. That came down to the final shot, and so they show up for these really big games, and it feels like they play their best basketball when the pressure is the highest. And so I want to say yes, these are all very winnable games for them. And so, part of me says, yeah, this is good, and in a sense can maybe get them back into it. They feel good about a couple wins. I know they have to go on the road to Athens, and they're going to be there on Saturday. And just to get back, honestly, they just need to get back in the win column to feel it. It's been a couple weeks now since they've won a basketball game. So I do think that part of it is that they can control their own destiny a little bit. And I think in order to do that, they're going to have to run the table. And I think they have to win out, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. Not that they would be bad losses, especially at Ole Miss, at Georgia, the Mississippi State game, obviously at home, but they wouldn't be like losses against Kentucky and Tennessee. It doesn't hold the same weight. I asked this to, my guy covering Wisconsin, Cole Abinson, the other day. I'll ask you the same question. I know the ceiling for Texas A&M was high coming into the season. What's the ceiling now? Is this still a team that can make a long run in March if they get there?
Part of me wants to say yes, although we haven't seen it necessarily play out on the floor in a couple weeks. I do think that this is a team that if they get hot and, they find that rhythm on offense again, I don't see why not. This is the same team that in December they took Houston wire to wire, and now Houston's the number 1 team in the country. And at the time, I believe they were only 3 or 4. So Houston's been consistent the whole year, but that's to say that they've had some really quality wins. And in fact, I believe their eight losses, their most recent losses, 8 of them have been by 7 points or less. So they are losing close games. Let's take the Alabama and the most recent Tennessee game out of the mix. Their margin is so slim. And I think part of it, too, has to do with the fact that the SEC has kind of cannibalized each other this year a little bit. All of that to say that I do think that if they get hot and they can find it again offensively, I do think there's a chance that they could be successful in March. I mean, you know how it goes. It's really anybody's game once you're in it. It feels like a fresh season.
Yeah, we're in March right now. It can literally be just that, the flip of the calendar, and this could be a whole new Texas A&M team. Donna, before I let you go, another interesting question here. Buzz Williams, if they go, let's say 2-1, 1-2, don't fare well in the SEC tournament, is it fair to say that he's on the hot seat?
I want to say no. I know that the Aggie fans would probably like to disagree with me. But I do think that he's built something here that the players buy into, um, and I think that that's half the battle,
Mhm.
honestly. Um, you know, there's also A&M is currently on a new athletic director search, so I also think that that plays a factor. I don't know what direction that they would decide to go in, but you know, it's really tough to say. I also just think that the team's faced a bit of adversity this season, and I don't know that you can judge his tenure at A&M based off of these last 2 months.
And clearly, Buzz, when he's at his best, one of the top coaches in the SEC and certainly in college basketball as well. We'll have to see, though, Texas A&M, a couple tough games coming up again, but certainly still in the mix. Donna, thanks for joining me here today.
Thanks so much.
All right, and to everyone else listening, thanks for listening again. Make sure to follow us on all of our socials and let us know who you want to hear next. Talk to you.